Corinne Mori, thank you so much again for joining me today with this news that we have that just broke last Friday. I mean, we're going to get into it. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure. I always appreciate that there's somebody out there willing to inform us of what's going on, because as you know, it's pretty difficult to get the accurate information. So certainly appreciate your role in this.
Well, let's start with some inaccuracies then, shall we? We got this news. They broke Friday. And I always have this thing where if news breaks on a Friday, it usually means that it's something that they don't really want to tell you. It's not something that they really want out there. But nonetheless, this is what broke Friday. Believe it or not, for all those out there that are watching this, British Columbia, up until just on Friday, had the mandates, vaccine mandates for medical employees, nurses, doctors, anyone in the health professions. Anyway, this is the clip in question right here.
We have reached the point in this journey that we've been on where I am confident that we can now lift the requirements of a public health emergency. So effective immediately today, July 26th, we will be ending the public health emergency for COVID-19 and be rescinding the few related orders that are still in place. And that includes rescinding the PHO order requiring COVID vaccination to work in our healthcare system.
Okay, so that sounds like, well, better late than never, right? Obviously, several years late compared to the rest of the world, but is it all that it's cracked up to be? Are they actually rescinding this, or are things getting more complicated, or are they going to be trampling on more rights in the process of this? Because this is where everybody's more curious about this. What's actually happening?
I mean, we've been waiting for 2.5 years for somebody to make that announcement. And let me tell you, the response to it and to how the further communication that Adrian Dix provided regarding this new BC Registry for immunizations, all it did was create more concern that this whole plan that they're implementing is not finished. It is not over. It is just one more step in what they have intended. So it actually should have been a joyful occasion, and it was not. We are suspicious, skeptical, concerned, just even how they addressed returning workers back. All of it was very, to be honest, there had to be evil intent. And I can, do you want me to expand on some of the, yeah, I will. I'll just go ahead.
Well, before we get into that, just give people a background, because you've been on the show several times, but some people don't know who you are and why you're even talking about this with this authority.
Okay. So I was a registered nurse in Nelson, BC. I have been, I'm experienced in Emerge. I worked in the COVID units, medical units, home health, some First Nations communities. I have a broad experience range. I worked during the pandemic and discovered that much of what was being told through media sources was not actually what was happening in the front lines. So when the mandates were coming down, and I'm going to speak mostly about nurses, even though it impacted many sectors from lab to housekeeping physicians. I'm going to speak just directly about nurses because that is where I have most of my knowledge. We had already come through a similar issue 2 years previous, where it was decided in negotiations between our union and the Health Authority's Ministry of Health that no nurse would ever be disciplined for not taking a flu vaccination. It had gone through several arbitrations here and in Ontario. They had looked at all the evidence, and they said it was just a punitive measure. This would no longer be implemented, that there would be disciplinary action against anyone who refused an influenza vaccine. So because this was just a policy that had come out in 2019, We as nurses who are under the authority of the union when it comes to any workplace conflicts had to submit to the union to defend us. As an individual, you have no rights. So if you are a union member in BC, you individually have no rights. You only have rights if the union decides to defend or intervene for you. So
I thought the whole purpose of a union was to protect workers' rights, not to usurp workers' rights and squash them.
That is how they were originally intended. But the actual structure of a union in this province is that there is a huge risk for corruption. And that is because it is constructed under the umbrella of a nonprofit, which means it does not have to pay taxes. It doesn't have to disclose its financial statements to any detailed degree. It doesn't have to disclose to its members what it's doing. And so it is legally protected from not having any kind of transparency brought to its financial transactions. So there is no way to hold it to account. There is only one legal recourse that a union member can take to hold its union accountable, and that's through the labor board. So we can't access the court system except under administrative law, which is the labor board. And there's very strict criteria around it. So in our case, when we were terminated, the union was supposed to start a grievance process, which is 3 steps to it, the final one being having the right to go to arbitration. Mm-hmm. And this was delayed for us, like by years. And so, we tried to put in a complaint to the labor board, and it was dismissed just on procedural issues. Well, you haven't finished the 3 steps of the process, so you can't put in the complaint. Well, the union stalled for a year between step 2 and step 3. Like, you're held hostage. And that is the protection that is given to union members in this province. It's quite a significant issue, because if over 40% of the workers in this province are subject to a union defending them and they choose not to, there is very little that we can do to stop whatever it is that the employer is dictating has to be implemented. So if you do have the possibility where there's collusion between unions and the government, then there is nothing stopping whatever they want to implement. So this became quite an issue. I don't think people really thought about the fact that if we live in a society where the government can just take your livelihood because you refuse to take an injection into your own body, that's quite significant.
Yes.
And yet somehow the messaging around that allowed the public to think that that was justified, that it was acceptable, that a government can override decisions around your own body, and that other people can make decisions as to what happens to your own body. So that was.
So fast forward now, they say that they've lifted this mandate. So. Right. Now, first off, my first knee-jerk reaction is, well, you fired, and I said 2,000 at first, but it's upwards of like 4,000 workers in British Columbia, maybe even more, that were fired because of their personal choice to autonomy, and because of this. So many people have probably moved on. They're not waiting in line, still sitting around waiting for their old job to come back. People had to move on, either with their feet, moving to another province so they could be hired in. Alberta was happy to bring people, Saskatchewan, all the way across. And then a lot of people have moved to the United States. They just said, forget it. I'll take my skills and I can file for a green card over there. And lo and behold, people are moving over and being welcomed over there. Now we have this huge shortage in Canada, or in British Columbia specifically, and they're bringing these people back. How many of them are even available to come back?
So this is there's a few pieces to this that I want to bring in, because it's not just numbers. Really, the point I want to bring first to the public is our government is doing its best to take every cent that we have and mismanage it and funnel it into places that we can't access the services that we should be getting, but other parties are benefiting from it. So I just want to state that that's where I'm going with what I'm going to tell you in terms of how healthcare service was managed over the last couple of years. So I've been in conversations with mayors around rural BC, because rural BC is being hit like crazy with all sorts of emerge closures. And then these rural communities don't have access to healthcare service. It's just escalated like you can't even count how many hospital closures or emerge closures there's been in the last couple of years. This is the whole understanding around this is when you look at the provision of healthcare in this province, it's done through health authorities. The amount of money that they're getting to provide these services and the mismanagement that's going on. So it was the health authorities that decided to do the terminations. It wasn't Bonnie Henry's public health order. She never said to terminate. That was a decision made by the health authorities. So they terminate the healthcare workers. Then they start bringing in terms of nurses, travel agency nurses, because they had to, get bodies onto the floor. But here the union allows non-unionized workers into the workplace who are getting paid more money than the employees. Not only do they get paid more money, it costs the public 4 times the amount, because you have to pay their accommodation, their travel, and the agency fees, and the nurses get paid more money. So you've got this huge increased cost per nurse, and over the space of 2 years, the use of travel agency nurses has increased 250%. Okay. This is while our nurses who can't work here go to other provinces and do the same thing. Okay. So they go to other provinces, get paid double time, accommodation. So we're sending our nurses to other provinces, and then we're taking those nurses and bringing them here and quadrupling the cost of staff.
And they don't have these mandates either. And that's...
No, we were the only ones that were still enforcing this. Then you've got this whole issue with immigration. So, the government is, we're gonna bring in international nurses. We're gonna fill these roles with international nurses. So through the BC College of Nurses, all of these international applications, we are paying for it because we've got to expedite this process. So taxpayer is paying for international nurses to come in, except they've never had so many fraudulent applications. So now we have an issue with, we're going to expedite the international nurses in, but nobody's actually vetting to ensure that these nurses really are qualified, because they are finding that it's really easy in other countries to pay somebody to take the exam for you or to get falsified credentials. And then they're bringing those into our province. So now we're going to be filling our healthcare service with people that do not have the same qualifications that we do. So just in terms of the administration of our healthcare performance, we are self-destructing. Okay, we're self-destructing. Now, going back to, what was the first question you were asking? Because there was one other piece I wanted to bring in.
So the idea that we have all these people that were working in the healthcare sector, they were fired, and then now they've probably moved on. It's been more than 2 years.
Right.
Why is it that they just assume that they could just hire these people back?
So interestingly, I'm going to bring in one other piece here, because this is where it shows the intent that much of this is planned. So like I said, step 3 for us is to go to arbitration. So finally, after a year of waiting, our arbitration was scheduled for March. It was delayed, but then we found out in May that instead of, so the whole thing was our case was supposed to go to an arbitrator for them to decide if the agreement, the employment agreement, had been breached, which it had. There's no discussion about that. Mm-hmm. But instead of the union allowing us to go to arbitration to get this ruling, the union and the health authorities made a deal. So the deal was that if the public health order was rescinded by January 31st, 2025, nurses could be rehired and all their benefits, which they never got, would be reinstated to them. However, if the public health order was not rescinded by January 31st and is instead rescinded by March 31st, it's up to the health authorities if they want to hire you back. So at the time when we received that ruling, it was like, well, this is totally catering to the fall election. So whoever's going to be in play, in power in the fall, they're giving them all sorts of ways out that they won't have to actually enforce the law. So if the NDP stay in, they're just going to keep this going. If there's other parties in power, they've given them an out that if they delay the rescinding of the order till after January 31st, then they don't have to pay us anything. So when that came out, we had already started another complaint to the Labor Board because I call this a bastard settlement. It is basically kids within the family get certain rights and the kids outside the family don't get any. Okay. And that's what happened was you have nurses who are still here, who are able to take a job back in BC, will have the right to have a job back. There's no compensation. There's nothing. But anybody who's left the province because they couldn't work here or they can't go back to work because of the emotional abuse, there was nothing put in place for them. So we have already started this complaint process because it's like the whole point of being a union member is that everyone accesses the same protection and rights. And the union deliberately made it that at least half of us would not get any kind of compensation or restitution for us. What was interesting though was this move last Friday where they went ahead and rescinded the public health order because that activated that agreement, which kind of surprised me, but in a way, I think it's because it's pretty obvious the NDP is losing in the polls. They don't have the same support. And so then they had to do something to show that they were actually responsible. And
well, that's exactly it. Now, I posted this on Twitter on Friday saying, breaking news, BC's health officer Bonnie Henry has announced that she's looked at the medical data and now feels confident that over 2,000 nurses, doctors, and other healthcare workers she fired over vaccine choice can go back to work. The data suggests... Sorry, wrong picture. The data is suggesting right here that it's all about political polls. It's political polling. The BC NDP are just getting trashed in popularity, and people are moving towards, it looks like, the Conservative Party. I've never seen the polls shift like this before, like so drastically.
You know, that 4% there, that 4% is me.
That's you. That's actually, that's accurate. That's accurate. You're a 4%er. So, because you're running as an independent.
One person is a 4%er.
That's right. That's right. You're running as an independent here. But yes, the polls are flipping, and they're flipping hard on the BC United, formerly the Liberals, because they towed the line as well. They were very much in bed with what the NDP were doing, and they lost memberships. In fact, the Conservative Party largely got its boost because of people who have left the that United Party to, because of these issues, because of the mandates, because of what happened during COVID, and they're just complicity with the way things were going. It almost felt like we had no choice. Now that there is a choice, British Columbians are coming together en masse and in polling data are saying, I'm going with the Conservatives. I'm done with this. We're not playing ball with these guys anymore because they never played ball with us and they never gave us a choice in any of this.
Okay, so there's two thoughts I have. Okay, I'm gonna comment on what you just said, but I do want to steer it back to another component of the rescinding of the mandate that people need to be aware of.
Now, when I say people are going towards the Conservatives, I mean that they're going towards there because they feel like that's an option. If there's independent options, obviously those are options as well. People just felt like the status quo was just not the way to go.
So I'm always interested in what is communicated and what is actually acted out. And so I'm just going to leave a very broad statement here that there can be all sorts of marketing statements made, telling the public that you're going to do something. But what I'm concerned about is when you actually set up your team and there are team members that actually don't support the values that you state you have. How are you going to implement that? So I'm just going to leave that there because I don't like to persuade people one way or the other. I'm just saying that right now, all of us need a healthy dose of being skeptical, and you need to take everything that's told to you with a grain of salt and understand that there needs to be action that backs up what you're being told. So I'm just going to leave it there because, yeah. So I'm going to flip back to another component of this mandate thing that I think is a big piece that people aren't aware of. And I know that we've had some chats, I think, about what's called the Healthcare Professions Act. This is actually legislature that was pushed through government last November. And the purpose
Bill 36, correct?
Bill 36, yeah.
Yeah.
And so the construction of this particular act was that up until now, healthcare professionals all have their own governing body. So physicians, nurses, dentists, they all have an elected body that oversees their licensing, their standards of practice, what's expected of them as a profession. What happened with this legislature was the government took over the overseeing of all of these bodies. So it removed the elected representation. It amalgamated 16 of these bodies down to 6. And the government has appointed directors to oversee how healthcare professions conduct themselves and also the regulations that they have to abide by. It also implemented severe penalties, so jail time, hundreds of thousands of dollars of fines if you do not comply with what the government directs. Okay, so that was a big shift that happened this year. One component of that is that it also included the introduction of vaccines into the regulation of healthcare workers. Mm-hmm. Now, up until now, this has been an employment policy. Okay, so for us, like I said, it was the health authorities that enacted the terminations. This was only done in the public healthcare sector. So in terms of hospitals and publicly provided care, it did not apply to private healthcare. So it didn't apply to dentists. It didn't apply to doctors in their own practice. It didn't apply to chiropractors. It only applied to the public sector, implemented by the employer. However, this Healthcare Professions Act now changes the enactment of these requirements through your license, okay, which is different than your employment.
Yeah, because you
Now,
could
because
change
it's,
jobs, but you can't. This way, they can take your license from you. I mean,
that's right.
if you
So
think that this
now,
stuff can go bad, I mean, just look at what happened to Jordan Peterson. What a college
yes.
can do to your career.
And it's not just the fact of your career. The fact is now it applies to every single healthcare professional. Before, the privates were protected. Now they are not. This,
Right.
this implementation of this act now applies to every single healthcare professional. When the mandates were rescinded on Friday, Adrian Dix let us know that there is going to be a new BC Registry that will be created. And I actually wrote down what he said. So now it's not just healthcare employees, it's also contractors, contracted facilities, which are basically private long-term care facilities, allied healthcare professionals, so that's all of your extended physio, chiro, everything, and volunteers. This will apply to everyone, that there will be mandatory reporting that comes into effect as of last Friday, July 26th. Everyone must report their immunization for COVID-19 and other influenza and their immune status for other critical vaccine preventable diseases. So, rubella, measles, that kind of thing. He said collecting these records will allow for quick action in the event of an exposure, outbreak, or future pandemic, because depending on the circumstances, for those who are not immune, this could include masking, modified duties, or exclusion from work again. So they are talking about that you will have to register your immunizations, your record into this BC registry if you want to be able to show up on any public healthcare site. Now, they will accept if you have immunization records. They will accept if you have like a positive lab report that shows that you tested positive for something. But let's face it, for many of us,
Because you would be immune after being positive of a thing.
yeah.
This is what's ludicrous to this whole concept. If it's so contagious and everybody's going to get it, well, then everyone's going to be immune from it in no time. We stopped talking about herd immunity a long time ago. This is something that was just kind of normal to understand. Was it not?
Yes. But what I find interesting is even though they say serology, which is blood testing, is not practical, there is, in many cases, no other way that you can determine what your antigen levels or your antibody or your resistance is to different viruses, right? You have to have blood work to determine that. So what I am seeing is that they are creating a registry that violates your rights to medical privacy.
Yeah.
They will be collecting, for some people anyway, your biological data in the terms of blood work to a registry of which you don't have any control over where that information goes. I'm concerned about that.
You ought to be. I mean, anybody ought to be. This is personal information that they just don't have any right to. And to say that this, not only is this required for your position, your job, but now it's required for you to even have a license to operate.
And then I was speaking with our lawyer today because, I'm trying to get guidance as how to respond to this next step if people want to apply for work. But he let me know that every profession is already been taken over by the government. So your engineers, your tradespeople, the Law Society is going through it right now. There is this huge move where our government is taking over what I term to be a managerial state. Now, if our manager was actually benevolent and doing its job well, then, lots of us would be like, sure, fine. We like being taken care of. But the reality is we just have to look at the results of what's happened over the last 2 years. And this managerial state is not managing in our best interests. And
No,
it is
absolutely not.
systematically taking away our rights to be able to participate in the process.
Well, we just saw how awful people can be to each other. given the chance that people could rat on each other to the state and get their neighbors in trouble, get coworkers in trouble, we saw what happens to that, and they're creating. It sounds like to me more of a situation like that here in British Columbia, not just surrounding COVID-19, but it would be surrounding any pathogen, anything that you're meant to be immune to. Because it's novel. Obviously, if you're working in the medical industry, you're going to be exposed to a lot of different pathogens and a lot of novel pathogens at that. It's kind of expected that people will catch these things, then become immune. But the proving it part is really the egregious part of saying, well, you have to submit to blood work. You have to submit to, I mean, are they going to be taking people's DNA and making a registry of DNA? What we don't know. And if you're going to trust the government with anything, transparency is definitely not one of them, especially given what we've just gone through. So what's going to happen because of this? Like you're obviously probably hearing grumblings from people in the workforce now, probably people who have gone back. Are there people that are went through all of this and still made it to this point, and are people going to take a stand on this and say no and possibly quit their jobs or move to another province over this ordeal?
I would say that again, because you and I are the real news network, most people aren't even aware of this Healthcare Professions Act and how it's going to implement or impact their ability to work. It's creating, this is going to create a lot of unrest. I'm already getting messages sent to me of people who are reporting that in the workplace, there's already nurses saying, oh, they think they're going to come back and take my job. Well, who do they think they are? We're the ones who worked all during the pandemic. And
they did it already.
Yeah.
They did it already. Yeah, there's no more room for doubt. I'm sorry. Like the room for doubt is gone. They fired thousands of people over this, and you think that they're going to stop there? Wow,
well, and then you're asking nurses, you're asking workers to go back into an environment where the conditions are going to be quite hostile. We're already, not everywhere, but we're already seeing there's a lot of hostility from people who stayed in the job and think that we deserved to be punished. So again, this is creating, it's creating friction. This is not solving problems. The government, for anyone non-unionized, the law is very clear about if you're terminated, you get severance, you get banks. It's very easy for non-unionized people to get what they're entitled to. For some reason, unionized people never get to access the provisions of the law. And so we're still struggling with that. So we've been victimized by our government, taking away our livelihood, and now we're re-victimized because they're ensuring that what we should be legally entitled to, they're not going to give it. So we are going to do whatever we can. So we're going to submit another complaint to the Labor Board. If anything, if there are any ethical arbitrators left, they will step up. And if they don't, then we know that there's no ethical arbitrators left. Okay, so that's going to be important to know. The other part is that I'm working with the lawyer that we've had for the last couple of years. And so if any nurse really does want to go back and reapply, then at least we can provide some kind of template where, because I can pretty well guarantee that the employers will make you sign off that you will not get any kind of restitution if you accept this job. So just to find ways that people can be protected if they really do want to try to go back to work, then they have the option of getting some legal advice through that. And for many of us,
And
you
just,
do
just
have
quickly, where can I guide people? Because there's probably people in the audience here that might want to be a part of this. Where can I leave them to contact you?
So our organized group, the best way to contact us is just through an email, which is bcnunurses@gmail.com.
Okay, yeah, perfect. So if anyone in the audience is eligible for doing that and you want to go through with that, this is probably a great avenue for that.
Yes. We're the ones actually that are acting like a union, providing supports.
Now tell me about that. So the unions are in bed with the government in British Columbia. That's not any news to anybody who's, kind of been watching what's happening. But what does that actually mean? Because from what I understand, you as a worker have to pay into this, and then the government's been giving the unions money, which I think is completely like, why would the employer of the people be paying the union? That seems like a conflict of interest. And now there's no way to find out. There's no auditing. There's no freedom of information, anything like that. Under what circumstances could union members get transparency with the money that's being hoarded, not spent, not allocated in the right ways, misused? Is there any recourse?
So we're attempting to try to get through to the BC Auditor General to ask for a formal investigation because there are public taxpayer monies involved. Interestingly, they don't answer the phone or return the messages.
Oh boy. So it really is a political thing. Like we're going to have a different legislature before there's any movement on this.
Oh, we absolutely need to change the laws. So in Canada, and then it's all handled provincially. So I'm just going to talk about BC. Union membership is mandatory. You don't have a choice. Every other country is voluntary. So then right away, you have accountability. If you have mandatory membership, the union gets paid whether they do its job or not. So it's a guaranteed customer base, which is like ridiculous. So if at least it was a choice for members to sign up with a union, it would force them into actually having to show that their services are worth paying for. So that is the first thing that needs to change. The second thing is we do need to remove the nonprofit status from them. So when it comes to financial statements, they all produce financial statements, but most people are unaware that the financial statements only report that the way that the statement was constructed, it adheres to the accounting standards. It doesn't mean that anything was verified in terms of the financial transactions. So most people don't know that. There is only one type of audit where the transactions are actually verified, which is a forensic audit. And I tried 2 years ago to bring to the annual convention and get the membership to vote in that the union had to conduct a forensic audit. And it was voted down because the union went to all the pre-convention meetings and said, this person is just an anti-vaxxer and a crazy person and don't vote in favor of this. And what
don't you want to know what's happening with the money? I mean, it's your money.
Yes. Wouldn't that be like the most obvious sort of, but they didn't get it. So what we have is there's a few components here. So this union gets 2% of the regular pay of nurses. So that a year ago was 60 million. This year has gone up to 72 million. So they're getting around $70 million for dues. However, in the last year, the union has been receiving hundreds of millions of dollars from the Ministry of Health. So last year, it was first off $100 million, and it was designated for this nurse support fund. 60 million of it was supposed to go to mental health supports for nurses. However, we discovered that none of that money was distributed because the union had no way to administrate it. Well, The union shouldn't have been involved. All you have to do is increase the benefits through Pacific Blue Cross. There's no reason why that money had to go to the union. So money, there was another portion that was designated for hardship fund. So I told all my nurses, apply for this hardship fund, $1,500 each. They gave it to some, and others they wouldn't give it to, because apparently losing your job does not qualify as a criteria for the hardship fund. So there was many members who didn't receive it. So that was like one chunk of money. But then there was this other memorandum of understanding that was created between the Ministry of Health and the union, which is a legal agreement, right? So the agreement was, last year they got 200 million. This year they get 250 million. And starting next year, they get 300 million every year thereafter. And this money is designated for nurse-patient ratios, which is really interesting because we've always had nurse-patient ratios. For example, on the medical unit that I worked on, it's funded for 28 beds. If you had 29 patients, you had to bring in workload. Okay, so you had to bring in an extra nurse. Always had nurse-patient ratios. We don't have a problem with the ratios. What we have is a problem of no nurses. So pre-pandemic, there were 2,000 empty lines. There are now 5,000 empty lines. That's job positions for nurses. There are now 5,000. And yet the union is going around marketing how, oh, we've got nurse-patient ratios now. This is so exciting. But then when you ask them, where are you getting the bodies to fill this? Well, we haven't actually found a solution for that yet, right? So all this money goes to the union. It does not get distributed down to the nurses. So we need to keep that separate. Union is very different from nurses. So all this money is sitting in their accounts. There's also this other thing called a retiree benefits fund, which is, again, government money, agreed. They are paying 1% of every nurse's wage to the union into a fund that is supposed to produce or extend some benefits to nurses who have retired. So this money was started in 2010. They've just included the LPNs now, so there'll be even more money going into that fund. So in the last 5 years, they've distributed $5 million to retired nurses. However, there's $500 million in that fund. And in the small print of the agreement, it states that there's no guarantee that this money will go to nurses. And we have a Freedom of Information request with Adrian Dix that shows a meeting with him and BCNU. They acknowledge that we need to decide what we're going to do with this money because it's not being used for its intended purpose. So we have issues where huge amounts of public money is going to a union, and this union is actually blocking nurses from working in communities, which contributes to the public not receiving access to healthcare. So I'm currently, one of my new projects is I'm working with trying to find a way that municipalities could actually sue the union for obstructing their ability to have adequate healthcare. And this actually could be one of the first cases that this could come up with. But I have a feeling, given the rage that's going on in some of the rural communities, that I'd get some assistance on this.
Well, let's hope. Yeah, absolutely. Now you're obviously going to be running as well as an independent in your local riding. Where would that be? Where can people find that?
It's called Kootenay Central, which is Nelson Creston.
Okay. And you independent, no pit party affiliation, so you're not going to be tied to having to, if you want to be on the bench kind of thing, toe the line. You're going to actually work for your representatives, or for the people that you'll be representing in your riding, and hopefully you do well in that campaign. Now I got one last question I wanted to ask, because you're a nurse, I'm a tradesman. Young people ask me all the time stuff about, advice on getting into the trades, getting into nursing, getting into healthcare work. What would you say to young people today that, because you know how it is, people just have a knack for these kinds of careers, and people have a passion for it, and people want to get into nursing because they love people and they love taking care of people and caring for and providing health services. What would you tell to young people in British Columbia that are going through school and want to become nurses, practitioners, that kind of thing? What kind of advice would you give to them?
I don't even think I need to give any advice. I was actually talking to a faculty member of our local nursing program, and I wanted to know what the numbers were that were enrolling here. And I was told that historically there was always 300 in the waiting list for a program that can fit 32 seats. Okay. And I know that because I remember when I registered for that nursing program, I actually lined up the night before at 8 o'clock and spent the night in front of the registration doors in order to register the next morning, right? So this year, they had to take everybody to fill 26 seats. Interesting.
So it's just not happening. People are just not getting into it.
So I said, so I'm assuming then that everybody is going to other provinces to get their training because the COVID vaccine isn't required in other provinces, right? It was just a could be kind of answer, but to have only 10% of the registrants in a program is significant.
That's really significant. Wow. I wasn't expecting an answer like that. Corinne, thank you so much for joining me today and allowing people to understand a little bit more of what's going on. Not what you're going to hear on the CTV, not what you're going to hear on CBC or Radio Canada, any of these mainstream, what they call mainstream. I don't even think it's mainstream anymore. I guess we're the mainstream. People are tuning into us more than they are to them. But yeah, so if you're looking for this information, this is a great place to get it. Is there a website where people can get more stuff that you're doing, more stuff as news breaks?
Yes. So honestly, I've posted a lot of informational videos on my YouTube channel, which is Straight Talk with Corinne, Corinne. My political website is www.corinnemori.ca. I've actually posted on there a few interesting interviews that I've had. There are a couple that people might find interesting in terms of the Land Act that is currently moving through legislation and the risk associated with that. So there's 2 interviews with legal experts that weigh in on that. So you have access to that on my website as well, corinnemori.ca.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.